So, welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros Podcast Festival and the Vanguard Podcast Network. I'm excited to spotlight 29 outstanding podcast creatives and professionals who answered the call to be a part of this series. My guest today is Jay Stokes. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So let's talk about AVIAT, atypical voices in our time. So you all are providing the unique perspectives. First of all, shout out your co-hosts before we get started.
Yeah, Jay Random and Koya. Shout out to y'all.
All right. Okay, awesome. So your podcast, AVIAT, provides an atypical perspective on everyday news. What inspired this unique approach, and how do you maintain this distinct perspective in your episodes?
Well, what inspired this was basically the parent company, which is Chemistry Productions. Basically, this is kind of like the voice of the creators of that parent company, just speaking on different topics, different issues you see in media, in the general world. And we felt that it was important to just add our voices to that. A lot of times what you see in mainstream media and even on some podcasts or some platforms that promote themselves as being a little bit different is you see somewhat of a censorship. And I believe that it's important to be honest and to be thorough in your takes on whatever's going on in the world. And so what we wanted to do was just provide our perspective and not hold anything back. Obviously, you don't want to be disrespectful towards any different groups, but you got to say it like it is. And so that's pretty much what got us going with this.
That's awesome, man. And when you say you got to say it like it is, it's one of the things I really love about podcasting in general is that we are in this moment laying down our living record, right, of our own experiences, our own perspectives and filters. And so while they may not be the perspective of everybody or the experience of everybody, you all staying, listen, this is our perspective. And you're going to get it if you listen to our podcast. So that's so important. And to recognize that as the approach to the podcast is really awesome, because a lot of people sometimes try to model after someone else or do the popular opinion. But just with anything, the representative never stays forever, right? You want to stay true to yourself. So that's cool. I'm glad that you all kind of started with that approach, and 4 seasons later, it's working.
Yeah, I tell you, those 4 seasons, it took a lot to get to that point. A lot of mistakes, a lot of mishaps, a lot of trial and error, but we got there.
Awesome, man. It's no small feat, especially talking about sustainability in podcasting. So congratulations to you and your team for those 4 seasons. It's major. It's a big deal. All right. So I'm glad we just kind of jumped in there with the podcast, but we always want to get to know the folks behind the podcast, right? We are people who happen to podcast. That's what links us, right? So for you, you have a background and passion for media literacy. Yes. So can you tell us about your journey as a health educator and how it led you to focus on media literacy, especially among the youth and within the African diaspora?
Oh, man. So we have to go all the way back to high school. So high school, I was just so certain that I was going to be a doctor. I just said doctor, right? And I'm thinking, well, every doctor just practices in the operating room. They practice medicine, what have you. I go to college, major in exercise science with a concentration in pre-medicine. So I'm doing the classes, organic chemistry, exercise science, anatomy and physiology. And the classes are difficult, but I enjoy them. But my grades aren't reflecting how much I enjoy them. So I'm going through the motions. I think, my sophomore or junior year. I think it's end of sophomore, beginning of junior year. And I joined this program within my undergrad in which, so it's a program where medical students kind of mentored the undergrad students. So one of the medical students, he advised that I go and get my master's in public health degree. And I didn't know what that was, but I was like, okay, I guess I'll try and pursue that. So I graduate from undergrad, get into a master's program, go there. I'm in Philly, and Philly is its own environment. I love it. Like Philly to this day, I'm such a Philly supporter. My favorite basketball team is actually the Sixers. So I loved it there, and I really got to get this hands-on experience with the different communities over there, specifically the Black community. And being a Black individual myself, it was a real big passion of mine to help out in these populations. And so from there, It was a 2-year program. And once I got to the second year, I was like kind of in limbo in terms of like, did I still want to pursue like my doctorate, become a doctor and go into medicine? And during that time, I actually, I think it was like 1 year, the first year I was in the master's program, I ended up going to the hospital during New Year's. I think I had like gastric reflux or something like that. And so I was there and I'm talking to one of the physicians that's in there that's helping me out. And he's like, oh, yeah, so what do you want to do when you get older? Like when you get out of college? I said, yeah, I want to be a medical doctor. And he's like, oh, what type of medical doctor? So at the time, I was focused on being an orthopedic surgeon because in undergrad with exercise science, you're dealing with sports. And I was like, well, I guess I'll do that. And he's like, well, when you become like a doctor, just to let you know that doctors, and I don't know how true this was, but he was like, they have a large divorce rate. Like, I think he said something like crazy, like 110%. I'm like, well, how can you have a percentage over 100? And he's like, because they often get remarried and get divorced again. So I was like, what? And at this time, I'm like, well, I want to be married too. I want to be a doctor and be married because like my inspiration for all of this, and I didn't say this in the beginning, in high school, like I used to watch The Cosby Show a lot. And I was really inspired by Heathcliff Huxtable to become a medical doctor. And so that's what kind of led to that passion. And so I was like, dang, well, I want that Cosby dream. Like I want to be married and be a medical doctor. And so it made me think about that. So I get back into my master's program and I'm like, I still don't know what to do. I had one professor there and she was telling me, hey, I think you should try and get like a doctorate degree in education. And I didn't know what this was. And so she just threw a program out there at me and it ended up being Columbia Teachers College. And I was like very insecure. I didn't think I could get into an Ivy League. So I was like, I'm not going to apply to it. So she personally sends me an email and she says, well, you need to apply to this like immediately, like your time's running out. So I just give it a shot, apply to it. A week later, I get a notification I'm in. I'm like, what? I got into the program? So like, you know, I'm freaking out. My mom's freaking out. And so then I get into this program. Now I'm in New York. And through that program, I start learning about health education and learning about different avenues in order to impact different groups of people. I obviously am interested, like I said before, in Black populations, the African diaspora in general. And I said, well, what's one area that can really impact Black individuals where I can help? And that's where I settled on media education. I go back to my inspiration for wanting to become a medical doctor, which was The Cosby Show. And I'm like, media can have a huge impact on people making positive decisions or negative decisions. So that's an area that I want to go into. And that's how I settled on media education.
That like that's a whole story. That's a whole journey, man. It was a long span of time and to a lot of dedication and commitment. So kudos to you for doing that. I mean, this is the thing where your story just begins to connect itself with the destiny, right? The future. Where are you going? So that's awesome. I really appreciate that story. I know the listeners will as well. So you mentioned in the submission your significant consumption of media by Black people, and you just mentioned The Cosby Show. How do you think this consumption impacts the community, and what role does media literacy play in this? And you spoke to it a bit, but expand on that because that's your whole mission.
So in being very interested in that topic, and that's part of the reason also why I wanted to dive into this podcast arena too, is I found that Black people in general across the globe tend to be the highest consumers of media, whether it be social media, television, what have you. You can look at the data and it says that. And so with that, there also comes influence. So media can influence people to make negative decisions. And I've seen that coming up. Like I remember G Unit, Guilty Pleasure. I still might listen to a record here and there, but G Unit 50 Cent back in the day, they used to have the long white tees and they used to act a certain way. And I saw me and my peers wanting to mimic that. And so it's like we saw ourselves in these individuals. So you have those traits. Then you can have the positive as well. When you see, I know Angela Bassett just won an Academy Award. She got an honorary Oscar. You see that as well. And you see, oh, well, a person that looks like me can be great. So then you aspire to greatness. Another example might be Black Panther. When you see all of the women warriors of Wakanda, And you see these Black individuals, not only are they warriors, but they're good in science, they're good in the arts, and that can inspire a generation of young girls, young Black girls, young Black boys to want to be better and do better in school and do better in STEM. So media in general is a powerful tool, and it's important that Black people control like our imagery or have a large say in our imagery in media, because it ultimately can impact us as a collective. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it definitely answered the question. It definitely speaks to your passion about it and this understanding that media indeed influences in a lot of ways. I'm a believer that if it exists in this world, then it must be represented somehow, some way, to show possibility, to show that you're not alone. There is somebody that can relate to it, from the worst rap we can think of, right, to the most conscious. There's something in it from someone else's life, right, whether we know them or whether our lives are paralleled. And so, yeah, it's important. And back to this concept of podcasting, this is us laying down our own voice, right, our own perspective. You can't say, oh, well, Jay Stokes meant this. No, you just listen to what Jay Stokes said. He'll tell you what he meant from the words that came out of his mouth, and he recorded, right, and push publish. So I think that's really important about this medium and sharing our own perspectives. You can't tell me I said something different, right? I put it here first. That's dope, and definitely something I think a lot of people can agree with and relate to. So becoming more social and organized since starting your podcast, something that you said was one of the positive impacts, right, of creating this podcast. Can you share how these changes have influenced your podcast content and your interactions with guests and listeners?
Okay, definitely. Thanks for asking that too. So basically, when we first started, it was just me, and so all of us are cousins. Well, Jay Random and Corey, they're brother and sister, but I'm the cousin. So it started with me and Jay. He was like, "Hey, I see you're doing this stuff with like your parent company. Let's do a podcast. Like we could join it onto that, and it'd be a way for you to just like air out some steam and just say your piece." And I was like, "Cool." So we started on some software. I think it was like Spreaker or something like that. And so it didn't go too well just because the audio was bad, and oftentimes we were just pausing, just getting used to that format of just talking to each other. And we usually talk on the phone like every day, and we weren't bouncing off each other like that. And so after a while, I was like, all right, well, let's switch on to like Zoom or something. So we got on Zoom and started recording on there. It seemed a little better in terms of the audio content, and then audio quality, I should say. And then he also recommended, hey, let's get some new microphones. And then I got really serious in terms of like the editing. Like I used to do audio engineering just for music back in the day. And so I got really serious with that. And we started seeing the quality of the podcast get better. And I wanted to add my own spin on things, like adding sound effects and then adding background music. And so everything just kind of progressed at a point in time. Regarding the topics, a lot of times we were, and we still are, very unfiltered. However, I think there's a way, especially if you're a media educator or a health educator like me, there's a way to be unfiltered and say your piece without being straight out disrespectful or just dumping on a whole entire population of people. And I found myself doing that a lot of times. Just the anger of being a Black man in this world, you know, you're going to dump sometimes. And I think there's a more comprehensive, a better way to get your viewpoint across. And no matter what, people are still going to take it any type of way, but I think there's a more palatable way to do it. So basically, his sister Koya joined on board, and I felt that I was talking better, but Koya was very unfiltered, very just like saying her piece, and I became more of like a moderator on the podcast, giving my viewpoint, but then Jay Random and Koya, they would say their piece here and there. And so we got a good dynamic going, and then after a while, Koya, she just kind of went and did her own thing. Then she started popping back in and out, and then Jay Random also started doing that, but I kind of kept everything just like in order, tried to keep the podcast going forward. And so here we get to today, where Great format, in my opinion, is there. The conversation bounces back and forth. I'm more confident in how I speak, so I'm able to approach topics with more vigor. And I also read about these topics ahead of time. A lot of times in the past, I would just come off the top of my head and just say whatever. But nowadays, I try to educate myself a lot more with the topics that I talk about. I'm reading a book right now called The Media and Me, I believe it's called. And they talk about like being informed rather than just opinionated, because a lot of people, they just come out here and blah. But it's just like, I think there needs to be some fact checking behind that. So that's where I come from these days. We've gotten guests. Koya has gotten guests on the past. She's very social. She knows a bunch of people. And then I've reached out to people on social media, and people have reached out to me on TikTok too. And that's how we got our different guests on there. One of the guests, I'll say his name because he's in the policy realm, Travis Washington. He actually is the author behind this act called the Hands Up Act, which seeks to punish police officers or law enforcement that kill unarmed individuals, not just Black individuals, but unarmed individuals in general. And I think it's like a mandatory like 10 or 15 years in prison for these law enforcement officials. And so I met with him. He talked on the podcast, and now we're friends. Like, we text all the time, and he's been on the podcast quite a few times. And so I'm very happy with that success. Me and Jay Random had a podcast episode recently where we were talking about our goals for this year to definitely get more guests and to grow our audience and our following. But I really love the way it's going. Like, the audio is on point, and I believe that we have a format that really works.
I really love that, Jay, because you learned as you went, right? You didn't let that say, you know what, this ain't working. This is trash. Y'all ain't showing up. I ain't showing up. Let's just dead it, right?
Right.
The perseverance and the resilience it took to find your sweet spot, man. I'm not going to ask you to repeat it, but I would say it again for the back, right? This is the work. This is how you get to where it is that you are satisfied with the work that you're putting out there, putting your name beside something and doing it until, right? Doing your iterations until you get it to where you want. And just based off of what you're saying, there's always room for improvement. So I can see that you're going to continue to iterate and just make this the best possible representation of yourself and your co-panelists. And I think that's really dope, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Hands Up Act, because I was going to ask you about that as well, because you mentioned that as one of your biggest podcast wins, was connecting with the architect of Hands Up Act. And what did this experience teach you about the power of podcasting in social justice movements?
Well, what it taught me is that, like, no matter where you are with like your efforts to do your own thing or do your own podcast, someone is watching, someone is listening. Like, I didn't think, even though I think Travis came along in the third season, and I didn't think we were really making much headway. But he found out and he reached out and he was like, hey, I would like to be on your podcast. And at first I thought it was a joke, but then he started sending links to the things he was on, and I took a gamble with it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let's try this guy out. So he comes on, we have a great episode, and I was like, wow, just to think, like, we were just talking and just speaking our minds, even talking about like unarmed killing of Black individuals by law enforcement. And this individual decided to reach out and be on our podcast. So it really showed me that like social justice efforts really do begin on the grassroots level. It just begins on someone just having a voice and having a passion and really like wanting to help. And then people will reach out. Like, and the thing is, you don't have to have your name in lights, just as long as you're able to make a change on like even the smallest level. Travis was able to come on and spread information about this policy that he's trying to have passed. And now when he goes into other rooms, he could say, well, I also spoke on this podcast and I was able to communicate my message here. And that can help get this policy passed. I hope it does get passed. We've been talking back and forth about it for quite some time, and there has been a lot of pushback, but I really believe that podcasting can be huge and monumental when it comes to social justice movements.
Absolutely. And it's needed and necessary, right? If this is going to be a platform where we get to use our voice and there's no barrier to that opportunity, to use our voice, then let's be here and let's do it. And I'm with him. I believe that enough of them go to jail over it. It's no reason to do it anymore. They don't want to go to jail. So that's a deterrent right there in and of itself.
Exactly.
But we deal in two Americas and we know. But definitely, I'm glad that you were able to do that interview. I'm glad that it's out there. And I want to encourage folks to go and listen to the podcast. But we must get involved in policies such as the Hands Up Act and anything to do with mass incarceration and police brutality and all of those things. So Thank you. Thank you for doing the work. Your advice for education and opinion formation, and you talked about this, like you went from being an opinionated brother to being an informed and opinionated brother. Right. Doing your research and all of that. And that's really important because words are powerful.
Right.
And so there's a responsibility inside of it in a lot of ways. So for you to say, listen, I know we have a lot of opinions and they're great because they're our opinions, but let's also add statistics, facts, research, because that impact, it also causes folks to do more. Right. To get off the podcast and then say, OK, well, let me go learn more about this situation. Let me go learn more about the Hands Up Act and that sort of thing. So your advice is to educate oneself, right, before forming opinions, especially on controversial subjects. How do you apply this principle to your podcast and what impact do you think this approach has on your audience? Again, we talked about it a little bit, but this is one thing that you feel is important. And I think it's important for a lot of podcast creators to think about.
Yes, it definitely is. I can actually go back to one topic that just came to mind automatically, and it was a topic of interracial dating within the African diaspora, right? And so basically, I came across this article. I forgot who wrote it, but it was way back when, and it was a black man who actually was advocating for black women to try and date outside their race because there aren't enough positive or good black brothers that are available. And so I read his article, and I remember I was mentioning it on an episode of the podcast. I forgot what episode because obviously it's been 4 seasons. So, but I was mentioning it on the podcast, and I was saying that his reasoning for this was not correct, and I felt like it was straight up based on opinion. And the thing is, his piece hit like major news outlets. And you see a lot of people online, both black women and black men, supporting what he wrote. And me, the old me, would have just came out and been like, nah, that's not true, blah, blah, blah. But I said, no, let me read up on this. And plus, even with my health education background, I already knew what research to look at and how all these stats and everything could be taken out of context. So one of the things that he was saying was, well, there aren't a lot of black men that are getting into college. And so when a lot of black women are in college, then they have less partners to choose from. And I'm like, okay, that is true, but that's on the surface. Now, if we dig deeper, then we also see that a lot of black men don't get to go into college because they're falsely incarcerated. They are targeted in schools. They are like sent in school suspension, kicked out of school for whatever reason. And a lot of times it's for the most minute thing that everyone is doing in school, but they're just targeted because they are black boys and that grow up into black men. You also look at income. A lot of black men aren't able to afford to go to college. And I'm like, also, if you're using that as the reason why black women should not go for black men, you're also eliminating Latino men. You're eliminating anybody who has a lower socioeconomic status. So what you're saying is you only want black women to go for white men and Asian men. And by all means, if black women want to do that, cool. I'm just saying if you're using that as a justification, then that is actually wrong. So that's what I mean by like having facts instead of opinions. So this author just went on and on and on listing all these facts. And I'm like, all of these facts that you're listing apply to men who are poor. So it's not just black men. And instead of just targeting black men and telling black women just date out, what we should do is work on the systems that get black boys and black men into these lower conditions. And you also have to realize too that black women, when they have children, they're going to have black boys and black girls. If they're mixed, you got the Tiger Woods effect. They still might be considered black boys and black girls, no matter what. So it's like, you can't just eliminate this group. And so I just don't like a lot of those narratives. And it pits us against each other in general, like Black women and Black men. And I'm what would be considered like a Pan-Africanist. So my thing is like, no matter who you are across the globe, if you're Black, then I'm going to have your back. Like that's that's what I believe. I believe we have different cultures that should be respected. Yes. But at the end of the day, we should definitely not be fighting against each other. And you see this on social media all the time. You see these little gender wars, always about dating, always about like sex, always about these topics. And I really feel like they're tired. And we talk about it on the podcast, like, let's just stop. Let's focus on better things like how to better educate our children, how to make sure Black women get high enough pay, how to make sure that Black men aren't being falsely incarcerated. It's like every other day you're seeing a story about a Black man that's been in jail for like 10, 12, 20 years, falsely imprisoned. Like, let's stop that. And then we can worry about everything else.
No doubt, man. You're bringing some critical thought to the space, and I love that. And I appreciate it. That is one of the main issues with our social media influencers. There's critical thought inside of these conversations, and it does not promote critical thought. So it's just a bunch of surface level conversations. So anything that disrupts it, I'm here for it. You know, so that's great, man. And again, there's great responsibility inside of this medium. I'm here for any and everyone, right? Because your perspective matters. If that's all you got, then that's all you got.
Right.
Have more to provide. Thank you for providing it. I appreciate it. Personally appreciate it. So, I want you to promote, because you talked about it a bit, chemistry, what Chemistry Productions is about and how it intersects with your work in podcasting and media literacy.
All right. So Chemistry Productions is a media education company. I got it established as an LLC in 2021. So it's established as an LLC in Connecticut, though I don't reside in Connecticut anymore. But that's where I was born and raised. And so basically, it's a company that promotes media literacy among youth, young adults, and even adults. Like adults can learn too. Our focus is definitely a lot with the Black collective or the African diaspora, because like I said before, they tend to be the largest consumers of media. And so I think that it's not out of bounds to say, okay, well, we should have a big focus on Black individuals in general. And I'm Black too. I don't think there's anything wrong with focusing on your own group. Every other group does it, so I shouldn't feel ashamed to do that. Outside of that, the podcast AVIOT is the official podcast of Chemistry Productions. And chemistry is spelled K3MISTRY Productions for everyone out there. And so AVIOT is the official podcast of it. And like I said, it's a voice for the creators of chemistry to just have their opinions be heard. And a part of educating within media is also creating your own media as well. So in the future, I definitely want to do more with chemistry. But since we're just focusing on the podcast here, the podcast is definitely an arm for it. And I think that it's good in terms of spreading information, letting people know what chemistry is up to, and also educating people through a different platform.
So as we celebrate Black History Month, how does AVIAT contribute to the wider conversation about Black history and culture?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I believe that AVIAT contributes to that larger conversation by, first off, just documenting the voices of Black individuals. So history in general, we know history has been meddled with. It could be changed over time. However, this is a document of Black people, how they feel in this time, in these 2000s, about what's going on in the world, what's going on in America, in their own personal environment. So that's one aspect. And then you have the stories that we're talking about. At times, we do mention historical Black figures, especially Black History Month. I try to highlight different Black individuals that are doing great works. You even think about the current Black history that's happening now with people like Simone Biles, Serena Williams, not even just athletes, but Nicole Alexander, and even Dr. Joy DeGruy. And I don't think enough people talk about her with her post-traumatic slave syndrome, that idea that she's promoted. So I believe that just talking about these individuals like that, and documenting that history is very important. And it contributes to the overall conversation of why Black history matters, why our voices matter, why our lives matter in general.
Absolutely. Definitely agree. And I love that you talked about present day, right? Black history. Like, we can almost stop talking about the stuff we've been talking about for the last 30 to 50 years, because we can talk about today and still have enough conversation, you know,
Right.
and enough grievances with the world and the way in which we experience it. And I think there's an opportunity for that in a lot of ways, and especially with podcasting, to be more relevant and present to what's actually going on today, because we need to be on top of that. Let's focus up. So I really want to talk to you about the future plans for AVIAT or any other projects you're working on. Do you have any things that you envision, especially in your own role? Do you see it evolving in the podcasting space?
Yes, definitely. With the podcast space in general, I definitely want to get back to making video. The problem is I'm a perfectionist. So when it came to making videos of the podcast episodes, like I'm cutting so much, doing so many transitions and so many sound effects and all that stuff that it takes a lot of time. So in the future, I definitely would like to hire a team that can help with that. However, I'm just going to have to do the bulk of the legwork with that going forward. So I definitely want to make more videos so that people can see the podcast on that platform as well, like YouTube, what have you. I also would like to get more guests, as I was saying earlier, so that we can have more conversations just like this. Like this conversation is excellent. The questions you've posed have been very thought-provoking, and it makes me just think about like why me and my cousins did this in the first place and what we're trying to achieve. So there's that. I also want this podcast to really be a voice for people who feel like a lot of things are not properly discussed in media in general. Like, if I may just provide one example. So sports commentator Stephen A. Smith, he said something on his podcast or Stephen A. Smith show a while ago, and it really stuck with me. He was saying, why are black people so mad at the white cops that kill black individuals, but they're not mad when black on black crime happens? I'm like, first off, that sounds like a white supremacist talking point. And secondly, when black on black crime happens, these black individuals usually end up in jail. And people are outraged about it. It's that we're paying law enforcement to protect us, and they're not doing that. So that's why there is a difference. And oftentimes they're not jailed. Like we've seen some things happening now, even though with the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd thing, it really took like worldwide protests to get this guy, like 10, 15 years? Like what 20 years, something like that? It wasn't even a lie. And then he tried to appeal his conviction recently. So you have that. And I believe that with this podcast, we provide that perspective to talk about that. And we're not coming at it from an angle of being politically correct. No, we have to talk about it. When it comes to politics, we're going to talk about politics. Like me personally, I'm not the type to tell people not to vote. I'm saying do your research on the candidates that you're voting for. And if you choose not to vote, how are you going to help your community out? Because a lot of people say, I'm going to sit out on voting. Okay, that's cool. But now what? Are you going to help your community out, or you just want everything to burn down? My thing is, by doing this podcast, that's me helping on the grassroots level, even with profits that are coming in from this podcast or chemistry productions in general. I want to use that to help out black individuals or other marginalized groups that are really suffering out there. Like I have a soft spot for disabled children, and I also have a soft spot for children who are orphans. So just like in those departments as well. So I believe that this podcast can definitely make strides in those areas. And with chemistry productions in general, the parent company, I believe that this podcast being an outlet for that, people can really hear our voice and hear our mission and what we're really out here to do. And they can support the media company. I hope that leads into like us developing a media curriculum, how to properly educate black kids on media, what they're consuming, and just let everything expand. Like ultimately, I just want to have a community of critical thinkers that believe in the company. They don't even have to believe in me. I want them to believe in the company's mission and vision. So that's
absolutely. I love that, man. I want to ask you what support from the community of podcasters would look and feel like. I don't know if I should ask you that offline, though, because obviously we have the community, we have the event, we want to provide the support. If it's a quick answer and you feel like, yeah, I know right away, shout it out. If it's not a quick answer, then we're going to figure out how to provide some support and resources to get your mission realized.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, it would just be like collaborations like this are good, being able to promote each other's like platform. I feel that a lot of times when people get like high up in terms of their numbers or in terms of their listeners, people who quote unquote follow them, then they feel like they're above helping out someone who's not as polished. Travis Washington with the Hands Up Act, he reached out to me on TikTok Chemistry Productions TikTok page, we have like 49,000 people who like our content and follow our content. I don't like to use the word follow because it sounds too cultish, but that's for lack of better words. And even though he didn't have that big platform, I took a chance because I believed in his vision. And so I believe like doing that's important. Also, I think meetups would be good, whether virtually or in person, to share ideas, to see how to support one another, because someone's vision in terms of if they have a company set up or if they have a platform set up, it could be supported by another individual. Let's see how to help each other out, especially as Black individuals. Like, we need to do a better job of that. And I've heard that time and time again from the Phil Donahue show from back in the 1980s to now. We need to do a better job. Like, and it just needs to happen. Like, stop saying we need to do better and just do better.
Absolutely. We all have access to choice and decision making, and that's what it is. Choice to do better and a choice to be better with all the nuances on top of that. I'm a life coach. That didn't come out right. I know you need extra support sometimes. Right. So the last question is, I really, really admire this aspect of you all starting and iterating and coming up with something that you are proud of today. And you're just like, yeah, we figured it out. It took us a while, but we figured it out. So for aspiring and even veteran podcasters who go into pod fade or go into this feeling of, I'll never get it, so let me just go ahead and call it, right? What would you say to aspiring and veteran podcasts? It might be two different messages. It might be the same.
For aspiring, I would say that just develop a mission and a vision, or what you a lot of people like to seek like fortune and fame out of these things, but I don't think, me personally, that is good to go off of, because fortune and fame, like those avenues could be so fickle. So it's just like, maybe just say, I want to develop a community, and what does that community look like, and what do I want to accomplish with this community of people. Just focus on that and move forward in that direction. Realize that your vision and your mission will happen if you keep at it. Like, I'm a real big proponent of persistence, and that's been in every aspect of my life. You've seen how I even got to this avenue of becoming a media educator. It's because I wanted to be a medical doctor, and I still became a doctor, just a different type of doctor. So it's just persistence. Just, you have to be persistent in that regard. For veteran podcasters, and I don't think I'd fall into this realm just yet, but I would say, if you've been doing it for a long time and you're not necessarily getting the results that you have, I don't think you should quit. I believe that you should continue to move forward with that. Maybe you can switch up what your expectations are, and it's okay to do that. It's not a failure, it's a pivot. Some things are not meant for you, and some avenues are. You just having a voice out there, that matters, and I don't believe enough people like believe in themselves regarding that. Like, your voice matters no matter if you have 2 people who are listening or 2,000. Your voice matters to those 2 individuals, to those 2,000 individuals. It's a real big deal. And whatever you're doing now, your voice is in history, ma'am, sir. Your voice is in history. So no matter what, your voice will live on, and you never know. When you're long gone, someone might pick up the podcast later on and be like, "Oh, this is great," and there you go. You got what you wanted, the fame and notoriety.
Right. Posthumous, but it came.
Right.
So tell folks how they can learn more about Chemistry Productions, how they can listen to the podcast and social media.
So AVIOT, it's spelled AVIOT. It is available on all the major streaming platforms, at least. I tried to get to as many as possible. So you got like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, what have you. So it's there. I'm working on getting it to YouTube. You can actually go to the Chemistry Productions YouTube channel. That's K3MISTRY Productions. And you can see like past videos that we did of the podcast. With chemistry in general, we're available on most, if not all, these social media platforms. Like, I've tried to start a Twitter page. I'm still trying to become Twitter savvy. That's another animal altogether. Have the Instagram page, the TikTok page, the YouTube channel. So eventually we want to get a website. I wanted to start the website last year. My wife advised against it because she said, I think you need to do a little bit more. So I'm taking her advice, and I hope that you all definitely look at those platforms and leave comments. Like, I love comments, and I've gotten a lot. I've gotten racist ones, and I've got ones that are helpful. And I use those comments in order to fuel like more material, to fuel my drive to create more material, and in order to talk about more topics. That creates community. And that's the ultimate goal, to create that community.
Absolutely, man. That brought up a question for me. So that wasn't my last question.
Okay.
How do you navigate knowing that it can be scary for people, knowing that they're going to say something and it don't have to be a lot, and it can be something, and it could be your truth or it could be a lie. But either way, there are some polarizing individuals that are going to show up in your comment section on your social media, and having a podcast that deliberately and intentionally goes against the bull on the internet. How do you navigate that? How do you go into that with the courage to say, yeah, they're going to talk, but let them talk? If that's how you go into it.
No, that definitely is. And I think that now Dave Chappelle, he's a controversial figure, but he said it best. The internet's not a real place. It's not a real place. So it's like, I really hope that especially younger individuals, especially because a lot of them are dealing with mental health issues, suicide ideation, I hope that they realize that you can literally just turn the phone off. You can close your laptop and that's it. No one's going to bother you again. So I really hope that people realize it's not a real place. I say my piece. I'm confident in what I say. And if negative comments come up, I will read and see what they have to say about it. And if I don't agree, I don't agree. I said my truth and I tried the best that I could to be objective, or if I'm opinionated, fact-based with my opinions. And that is that. I still have opinions that aren't necessarily fact-based, but I believe in this. And so that's my moral grounding, and that's where I go with it. And I just believe that being grounded, realizing that people are going to dislike you no matter what. You can be a great individual. I know people say, oh, they killed Jesus, so everybody dislike Jesus too. But I'm just like, but to not be facetious, I really believe that if you are grounded in some set of morals or principles, then just be confident in what you're saying. It's easier said than done, but believe me, these negative comments are just that, negative comments. And you can spin it. You can take that negative comment and turn it into a positive, turn it into more material that you can use. Like we always talk about, like Black Twitter dragging you, blah, blah, blah. I've never been dragged by Black Twitter, but if I am, so be it. I believed in what I said. And also to realizing when you actually are wrong. Like there was one time I used the term Latinx on a video, and that's what I was taught to use, Latinx, by my education. And people in the Latina community, or collective, I should say, came out and said, we don't like that term. I did some research on why they didn't like that term. And I took those negative comments and spun it into why that term Latinx is not preferred. And it turned into more material. So that's how you can spin a negative and turn it into a positive. Just one example.
That's awesome, man. You're an alchemist on your own podcast. And the biggest takeaway is to be confident with what you are putting out there in the content before it even gets into the world. That way you can stand on business when the time comes. For sure. Well, man, I really enjoyed talking to you, learning more about AVIOT podcasts and just learning more about yourself. It's rare that I get to have these one-on-one conversations. And so this has been great, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate you too, man. Wonderful job moderating everything. And I wish you the best in all your endeavors and everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, man. Appreciate it. I'm going to close this out. You just stay right there for me. All right.
All right.
I want to give a big thanks to our Afros in Audio and Black Podcasters Association members for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcasters Association, the link will be in the description. And if you want to join us at the 6th Annual Afros in Audio Podcast Festival, visit afrosinaudio.com. Follow at Afros in Audio on all social media channels, and you can find and follow me at Talib Jasir on Instagram. So thanks again, Jay Stokes, for being a part of Afros in Audio's Black History Month interview series. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you.